Okay, today I'd like to talk to you about the pieces of your research proposal. I know that everyone's looking at this and thinking, what's a chapter 1 and what's a chapter 2 and what's a chapter 3, and sometimes it even gets confusing whenever we're looking at this in distance education and we're thinking about chapter 1 in the book versus chapter 1 in our proposal and chapter 2 in the assignments of the readings. And so I want to try to clear some of that up today. And I wanted to walk you through a bit of the process, even through what would be your thesis or even a dissertation. These documents are very, very similar in that they all consist of 5 chapters. And so in those 5 chapters, we're going to develop really a version of the first 3 chapters in this research methods class. And so those 3 chapters, we refer to them as your research proposal. And the reason we call them proposal instead of first 3 chapters of your thesis is that you write this as a proposed research project that you're going to take on. And so everything is in future tense in the research proposal. Then you take this to your graduate committee and you say, hey, I'd like your approval on this. They look at it, they may tweak it a little bit, they may make suggestions on your proposal, and then you go forward and you carry out the research project. Now, whenever you come back and submit your thesis, you're going to use much, if not all, of what you developed in that proposal. You're just going to change it around to past tense to say this is what we did or this is what I did instead of this is what I plan to do. And so for the purpose of this class, we're developing the first 3 chapters in future tense. And so we're going to propose what we're going to do. And so those chapters for the full thesis are the chapter 1 is the introduction, chapter 2 is the review of literature, chapter 3 is the methods of your study, chapter 4 are the results, and then chapter 5 includes your implications and conclusions and even what you would recommend for future studies. And so, of course, you can't get the results and you can't make recommendations and conclusions for further studies in a proposal, so all we can do is chapters 1, 2, and 3. Chapter 1, as I mentioned before, is really just an introduction to your study. I'm going to break that down for you here in just a minute. Chapter 2 is going to be the review of literature, and we'll talk more about it in a future video, but it is really just that, a complete review of literature, of everything that you can find and dig up that deals with your topic. And then chapter 3 is really just the mechanics of your study, of how you intend to carry this out. And so let's back up and talk about chapter 1 for just a minute here. So chapter 1 in your thesis or in your research proposal is often just referred to as the introduction. And so what everyone needs to do is become very familiar with your APA manual, the 6th edition, or at least the OWL at Purdue website that leads you through these APA guidelines. And so APA has a recommendation and a guideline for everything within this document, including chapter headings. And so I believe in chapter 1, this introduction is going to be all in caps, and so I didn't write it up here like that, but go back to APA and determine how that's supposed to be written out and spelled out in your document. But at any rate, those recommendations are what you're going to be evaluated on as far as the style. We are always APA in agriculture. And so chapter 1, known as the introduction, and so it has these subheadings within chapter 1. The first one is called the background, or sometimes you see background and setting. And so that at times, and I'm not sure if you can see part of this word right here, but it says setting. Background / setting. I'm kind of new to the lightboard technology here. So background and setting of your study. And really, this is just a brief introduction. Now, sometimes this is 2 or 3 pages long, and some people's definition of brief is a little different than others, but it's just a little bit of literature that leads up to why you did this study. And so, for example, if we're looking at new cultivars or new hybrid corn plants, we need to background this study with just a little information of the problems maybe that we've had in encountering this solution to feeding 10 billion people soon. And so we need to set the stage on why you decided to conduct this study. And that's what happens right here in this background and setting. Everything has to be documented. Everything has to be cited. You have to cite sources for everything that you say in this document, right up until a small section in chapter 5. And so if we're going to say that we have a problem with world hunger, we need to document a source that says we have a problem with world hunger. If we want to say that scientists have developed new cultivars that may address that issue, we need to cite a source that says that we are developing those. And eventually you're going to get to something that you're going to test. But this background and setting really sets the stage of why you're doing what you're doing. So it's a brief review of literature, of studies that have been carried out in the past that really sets the stage for what you're getting ready to do. The next thing you do, or the next thing you list in your chapter 1, is the statement of the problem. Now, many of you have already settled on your problem. We developed a problem statement for this class, and right there is where it goes. You know, it could be 1 or 2 sentences. It's very short. And so, statement of the problem. We've got this as example that I use, that you're going to test a new cultivar to see if it could be grown in certain conditions that may help feed a population that we were having trouble feeding. And so the problem here gets very succinct. We get down to a couple of sentences of where we have some people that are suffering from food security, and we are looking to see if this new cultivar or this new variety could be the answer. And so right there is the statement of the problem. Now that gets pretty specific. You start out very broad with the problem that we've got up here in the background and setting, and we get down to this more succinct statement of the problem of what we're going to look at in this research project. And then you follow that up and get just a little more specific by getting to the purpose of the study. And so let me write this here. The purpose. So once again, we've got from broad to much more specialized, and you'll see that this works this way lots of times throughout this whole document. And I draw this diagram a lot of times for my students, especially in chapter 2, where we start very broad here, and then we work our way down to being very specific finally. And this works the same with your review of literature, where you start very, very broad, maybe even the history of hybrid corn in the United States or across the globe, and come down to the very specific situation that we're talking about. And that's the way that we're doing here with chapter 1. We started out with this background and setting. We've got a statement of the problem. And then finally we get down, or not finally, but at this point, we get down to the purpose of the study. Now the purpose of the study is broken down into a few other parts as well. And so within this, you might have within the study these hypotheses. Now, depending on your study, whether it would call for hypotheses or research questions or objectives of the study or some combination of the two, it really depends on what you're doing. If it is a study that calls for inferential statistics, which we'll discuss later in the course, then you definitely have null hypotheses that you're seeking to either to support or not support through your results. And so this portion will have your hypotheses, possibly your research questions, and they are very, very specific. So at this point, you're getting very specific. And so we've gone from talking about the problems that we have in feeding a certain group of people down to a very specific plant. Will this plant develop, and will it produce under these circumstances and these very, very specific circumstances? Working right now with a young lady in agronomy that is looking at being able to save seed from one season to the next. And so sometimes farmers have seed left over. Often it's treated as waste, and it's destroyed. And specifically with soybeans, with corn there is a way of recycling it back through and determining its viability. But with soybeans at this point, it's treated as essentially a biohazard, and it's destroyed.